All right, so I wanted to talk about the story of Diarmuid and Grainne, which is one of the most important stories of the Finn cycle, as it's connected to Finn McCool and Diarmuid, who is one of the Fianna. And Diarmuid himself, according to Boban, or Boban, the user who is well versed in the Gaelic tradition and Scottish Gaelic as in particular, he mentioned to me that that some scholars believe that Diarmuid is actually just an epithet or a continuation of Dawn, who is Diarmuid's father in the stories. But some scholars believe that Diarmuid is really just Dawn himself and not originally his son, that he's sort of an emanation or an epithet, an aspect of Dawn. So, for example, I'll read this quote just to clarify that. So it says, let's see. He is frequently called Diarmuid Dawn, which, as I think, is only an inversion of Dawn Diarmuid, meaning Dawn the unenvious. So the assertion is that his name, Diarmuid, is an epithet meaning the unenvious one, and that this would have originally applied to Dawn himself, going by the name Dawn Diarmuid, or Diarmuid Dawn. And then another scholar says, it is noteworthy also that Dawn was a god of the dead, and that Diarmuid, whose name means unenvious, is sometimes known as Diarmuid Dawn, sometimes as Diarmuid Mac Dawn, or Diarmuid Dawn. Let's see. In multiple different traditions across Ireland, he'll be known as variations of Diarmuid Dawn or Diarmuid Mac Dawn. And actually, D-U-B, is the name of Diarmuid's father in the oldest literary reference to him. And that is not the name of Dawn himself, but it is a similar word. So there's some confusion there. So going from this idea that Diarmuid could be Dawn, when you look at Dawn himself, the most widespread theory in Celtic mythology comparative studies is that Dawn is the equivalent of Yama, the Lord of the Dead in Vedic mythology. And this is based on the fact that Dawn is, well, he's the Lord of the Dead in Irish mythology, and he has an island that the dead have to go to when they first die, before traveling to other parts of the afterlife. And Dawn is basically the first person to die. Basically, it's a little unclear, but the way comparative scholars look at him is he's the first significant member of the invading Sons of Mill who dies as they're arriving to Ireland. So this somewhat fits with Yama, he's the first being. He's sort of Yama is sort of presented as an immortal. It's kind of unclear. He's born of the gods, but he gives up his immortality to become mortal, and then his lineage, if he has one, it's his lineage is human and mortal, or him and his brother Manu. So basically, because Dawn is the first significant death in the Sons of Mill, and Yama is the first man. So he becomes the first mortal, basically, and the first to die, and that introduces death into the world. That there's this parallel, and they're both the Lord of the Dead in both traditions. So I'll leave it at that for that parallel. It's kind of not that in depth of a parallel between Dawn and Yama, but it's just the basic idea that they're the Lord of the Dead and connected to dying first, and that introduces death. And to give some more context to Yama, he is also there's Yama and Iranic Yima, who's the same, and Yama or Yima are the Indo-Iranic parallels, usually compared to Adam, of the Adam and Eve story. So this has to do with the fact that Yama or Yima are seduced, tempted by their own sister in the myths, and apparently this is what brings death into existence, mortality among living beings, and let's see this. Well, you guys have probably read about the parallel to Yama and Yima and Adam and Eve. So there's this kind of tempting of Yama by his sister Yima, and he resists at first, but ultimately there's a hymn saying that he gives up his immortality, gives up his life in order to have offspring, basically, to reproduce. He chooses death. And that introduces death. So what were you going to say?
Real quick, I just want to ask, is Mimir the first to die in the Aesir-Vanir War?
Well, I do believe Mimir is the correct parallel of this. So that is...
Well, yeah, I'm just wondering
pertinent,
if he's like
but I'm not
first.
Sure. I think that's a good question. I'd have to check. I know...
It doesn't state that... It kind of just summarizes the war instead of like going in depth and saying this person died or whatever. And he doesn't die in the war. He's decapitated after the hostage exchange.
Yeah, but like, is he the first casualty? Like, we can assume there was a battle, but
he's the only one mentioned.
Yeah,
that's there's obviously, he dies before Kvasir.
So I think I think that could go back to...
maybe counts as a casualty, quote-unquote casualty, before Mimir. I'm not sure.
Did you say Gulvig?
Like she's killed.
Yeah, I was thinking.
So, and she also comes back to life. I don't know whether this would take place before or after Mimir's decapitation in the story or in the chronology. But either way, if the parallels are strong, I don't think it's a strong argument against Mimir being Yama. It's just, trying to look into the details as well.
Well, I got my Rosetta here, so I'll look through it while this is going on.
Yeah, and I think, like we were saying, he's basically the first significant death, and that might be the big thing, or first, especially among male deities. I think we're looking for the first man as the theme, or the first one who becomes a mortal man, and that doesn't happen to Mimir. Obviously, he doesn't become a mortal man. That theme isn't there, but at least in the Indo-Iranic tradition, that's the implication. But at the bottom of that might be just the first one who dies, and then, or the first significant male deity who sort of dies, and then introduces death into the world, and then becomes Lord of the Dead. But there's more to the mythos that connects him to Mimir, and I don't have this memorized very well, but there is an argument that Victor Rydberg makes, which talks about Mimir's grove or Mimir's tree, and how Lif and Lifthrasir are those the names? They're the humans who are hidden away in Mimir's holt, Mimir's enclosure or grove or something like that. What's that?
Yeah, holt is like a forest or a wood or something like
that. Exactly. So there's something about Mimir's holt, and so these humans are hidden there supposedly during the Thimble winter, I think, and the long winter when they'll have to survive and then come out at the end of the cosmic winter and replenish the human lineage. And that's a theme of Yima, especially in the Iranic version, that he is tasked by Ahura Mazda with creating an enclosure of some sort. It's unclear if it's a cavern or something like that, but it's an enclosure is the idea. And he brings in different creatures and humans, and they survive the long cosmic winter that Ahura Mazda brings. And at the end, they have to emerge and replenish the world. So that aligns with Mimir as well as Mimir's connection to death and certain other things that you can connect. But let's see. Did anyone else have any thoughts on the connection between Yima and Adam and Eve and these sorts of things? I'm gonna find my next
off, I'm kind of noticing like in your recent Cosmic Egg video, you're talking about how the primordial ice would be the inert waters, and obviously in the north, that was more obviously ice rather than just waters like it was everywhere else, where water doesn't freeze any time of the year. Like, you know, Thimble winter. So you have the flood of Ymir's blood in the beginning, and Bergelmir's like the Manu of this Manvantara, if you're familiar with like the terminologies of like Yuga cycles and Kalpas and all that. And then it seems like Fimbulwinter would be like this flood at the end of the world, because each Manvantara is separated by a deluge.
Yeah, you're right. But, I think the Fimbulwinter is different than the flood, even though the mythemes can overlap. Like Yima's enclosure has a lot of similarities to Noah's Ark with all the animals that he brings in and stuff. But that doesn't, that can be. But then at the same time, Yama's brother Manu is the one who has a specifically flood mythos where he's riding out the flood. So these mythemes between these two brothers, Manu and Yama, can kind of overlap, because Yama is surviving the winter with an enclosure with sort of keeping, but then there's a flood mythos that's kind of getting confused, or that's right alongside of it, but happening at a different time, like you said. I think the Fimbulwinter is this between cycles thing, and then there's a flood right after the creation, maybe, right? Is that what you were saying as well?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking now, like perhaps the end of a Manvantara, it's called a winter because it's like an ice age, and then when coming out of the ice age, everything melts and floods, and so the beginning of it seems to be coming out of a flood. All right, so that's kind of interesting. Things are.
This also
that could be, yeah.
This also brings to mind that it's interesting you're comparing this to Lif and this Thrasir, the last humans at the end of the cycle, opposed to Aska and Embla, because I mean the Aska and Embla myth, I don't think it's really done anywhere else that I know of, and it's also a working theory of mine that it's actually not even about the first two humans. It's about bringing life to statues, but that's a whole other discussion.
Well, you should watch my video on the creation.
Yeah, they're like
I should pay attention.
The tree plant
basically
come from the seed of this guy.
Yeah. I think there's different variations on it, but I do think the Ask and Embla, I think it's valid, but it's a different. Somehow in Indo-European mythology there are different first humans, and it gets confusing. There's like the first humans, Ask and Embla, that come from the seed or blood of the Sky Father, Father Sky. Sorry,
that's I know one... that myth. I'm just
saying,
of
course. Yeah. The specific way it's presented, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
it's more esoteric. I feel like
you have like they're like the Angiras. Is it Angirases in
the first fire priest?
Vedic myth? The first fire priests. So they're like this mythical ancestors, fire priests. They aren't necessarily your own ancestors of every lineage. Basically, they're like this mythical first people that are priests, and they're like semi-divine, and then there's other lineages of first people like Yama and Manu, who come from they're the sons of the sun god. So there's these different offshoots of quote unquote first people, and so that's why it gets confusing, I think. But it doesn't mean there's a contradiction.
I just thought of this now, and we may want to scrap this for another discussion, but the fact that it's the first fire priests that come into play kind of reminds me of Nimrod in biblical stuff, which is obviously a lot older, because he's the first fire priest. He literally is a fire.
I haven't looked at that at all.
Probably fire was not unknown to like Tubal-Cain, who is the inventor of metalworking. So, and definitely lived before Nimrod. So I don't know whether Nimrod counts as the first fire priest. Kind of parallel.
Well, sorry. Coming back to Dawn and Yama and all that. So, first of all, I'm seeing like the connection between Diarmuid and Dawn as like similar to Finn McCool and Eberfin, because you have his brother Eberdon obviously dies before they even get there on that island, which is part of the afterlife. But Yama, so he's very closely related to Mitra and Rudra types. Obviously more so in like Indo-Iranian, he's kind of absorbed a lot of Mitraic qualities because he's like a judge of the dead, so that kind of lawful overlap with Mitra, but then also because he's a god of death, that's where his overlap is with Rudra. So that's like I was thinking of that when you said that Diarmuid is part of the Fianna, or was a former member of the Fianna.
Yeah, both Dawn and Diarmuid are mentioned as part of the Fianna, and Dawn gets kicked out of the Fianna for some offense. And then Diarmuid also has to go into exile from the Fianna for taking Finn's the woman that he wants to marry, which is the story of Diarmuid and Grainne. So they're both closely part of the Fianna, and then they become exiled.
Like, no, I was just saying that the connection between the Rudra and the kind of Yama type or god of death in general is actually interesting, because in the Etruscan case, we do have the Wolfman, which is a typical depiction of the Rudra kind of archetype, being readapted in the iconography of the god of death, or rather of the word of the dead, who is named Aita, obviously an Etruscan adaptation of Greek Hades, so not really a native Etruscan deity, but obviously they took the iconography, which was definitely way earlier. Like, we have evidence of these Etruscan wolfmen way before the usual frescoes in tombs, which are obviously Hellenized. So probably the connection has some basis, although it could also be about the Rudra type being specifically the god of the blessed dead, or of those who have achieved some sort of kenosis or enlightenment. On the other
that's
hand,
what I was thinking is the esoteric
about the connection between the judicial function and the world of the dead. I mean, obviously, also this is pretty much an Indo-European thing, and it's pretty much archaic, because we do have both India, Greece, and Rome independently agreeing on this sort of quote-unquote trinity made up of the lawful sovereign, the quote-unquote terrible sovereign, which Dumézil has recognized as a deity long ago, and then the god of the dead. So obviously in Greece, I guess it's easy to figure out that there's Zeus, Poseidon and their brother Hades, so the god of the dead, the kingdom of the underworld, who is also called the underworld Zeus. So obviously there is a close connection between the two. Dumézil himself did not seem to realize, apparently, that Poseidon was actually a kind of sovereign type, and that therefore this whole triad could be an Indo-European thing. He seemed very frustrated by it. I'm actually wonder how he did not see the obvious connection of this triad with the Roman triad of Jupiter, which is essentially a god in three forms. So Phidius is the god of daytime thundering, and in general, the aspect of Jupiter associated with the daytime. Then we have Sumanus, the god of the nighttime thundering, and so the night aspect of this deity. And Dumézil did recognize Phidius as the lawful sovereign and Sumanus as the terrible sovereign. And then there's the third element of the triad, Weiois, which is pretty much literally the anti-Jupiter, the opposite of this deity, who is generally understood as the underworld aspect of Jove and routinely identified with the Greek Hades. So it's not even that peregrine. And in India, we do have this particular instance of Mitra, Varuna, and Yama, specifically the Yama we're talking about, being merged eventually into the god Dharma. So the god of the law, we could call him, or natural order, if we want, is essentially a mix of these three individual deities, which tend to appear more separated in the Vedas, and the Vedas do tend to emphasize the Mitra Varuna connection much more than, the triad of Mitra Varuna and Yama. I don't think there's like a hymn addressed to the three of them together. But then in the epics, it becomes clear that they are ultimately the same deity in the form of Dharma. And this also lines up well with the Kalash system, in which essentially the Yama linguistic parallel actually has plenty of material from Mitra and Varuna mythologically. So probably it was not specifically a late development in both Vedic and divergent branches like the Kalash, which would support the hypothesis of it being ultimately an Indo-European element inherited independently in Rome, Greece, and the Indian zone.
Took a lot of the words out of my mouth there. So after realizing Utu was like Mitra, Surya, Yama, I was kind of realizing that sovereignty is a triad rather than just a duality. But he kind of touched on it a little bit there in the beginning. I think a possible esoteric explanation for the offense Rudra type takes to Yama is they're both death gods, but more specifically, Yama oversees the recycling of souls back into the cycle of death and rebirth, whereas Rudra's purpose is to sort of guide souls towards enlightenment and transcendence of that cycle. So that's probably what that offense means. I'm not saying it does, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff, and I didn't know that about the Kalash one either. But I'm still playing with the idea that Hades could be a different death god that's substituted in for the Yama type, but it would still make the same triad, even if that was the case. But who knows, right? I'm going to go through some Diarmuid stuff, if that's okay. And one thing I'll mention on the Yima thing as well, that's the Iranic version of Yama. So Yama and Yima both succumb to the taboo of incest with their sister, who seduces them, and this leads to the introduction of mortality, of course, but also so that's different than the Adam and Eve story, which involves forbidden fruit, right? and you could say, the seduction is, or the fruit is a metaphor for the same type of seduction, potentially. But also Yima apparently gives his subjects some kind of meat that makes them immortal in some traditions.
Well, I mean,
so and meat is taboo in the meat also has this forbiddenness in that society, in the Iranic society, especially Zoroastrian, with certain restrictions.
In Indian and Iranic ethics, yeah. But I want to talk about Adam and Eve for a second. I mean, you got to think about, they both come from the same father. And also, what is a snake holding an apple supposed to be representative of? I'll just let that sink in.
Yeah. It all comes together and aligns. So you can easily say, the sexual transgression is the same as the forbidden fruit. I mean, it's used as a metaphor just casually in our society today for the same meaning. But at the same time, there's also the actual food in some versions of the Iranic. But it's meat instead of fruit. So when you get to the Diarmuid story, this is the Irish or Gaelic version of this theme, and what you have when you realize that Diarmuid could be just a version of Dawn, or continuation of Dawn, the Yama parallel, and then you look at his myths, what you realize is he has all of the mythos that you see with Yama and Yama in the Indo-Iranic world, but then you also have part of the story of Diarmuid and Grainne, where Grainne makes Diarmuid steal a forbidden fruit and they eat it. They literally they go to a wood, and Grainne demands that Diarmuid steal this forbidden fruit that's being guarded, and it's been outlawed that's the one thing they can't eat, and all this stuff. So my overhanging question as I go through this is, what does it mean that the Indo-Iranic versions, neither of them have the forbidden fruit? Actually, they just have the incest or a meat that gives immortality. But then you look at the Irish version, and he has all the same mythos as the Indo-Iranic, Indo-European god of the dead. But then he has specifically the stealing of the forbidden fruit. It's berries in the case of Diarmuid. It's not just an insert of an apple tree or something, but and it has some differences. But so what does that imply about the diffusion of these stories, and what the root story was, and how does it connect to Mesopotamian versions and all of that? So I think there's a lot unanswered about that, but I'll go through the Diarmuid parallels to show how similar he is. It's kind of amazing when you realize the right thing to look for, and then the whole story is just this compendium of myths relating to Yama, myths that you would expect from a Yama-type, and then other things connected to the origin of death and all of that. So, okay. So to start out with, Yama in the Iranic version is one of his main myths is that he gets I don't know how to pronounce it, but Shvarane or Shvarana or something. It's called the fortune or the glory. It's a shining mystical sort of halo that confers sovereignty and fortune and glory, basically. And Yama is the one who it descends upon. He becomes the possessor of the sovereignty. That's why he becomes the sort of archetypal first king, and he rules during this quote unquote golden age, until finally he loses the fortune or glory, the Svarena. I don't know if one of you guys know how to pronounce that properly. You could chime in, but
I suppose it's Svarena, but I'm not sure about it.
Farina, something like that.
Well,
yeah,
it's Gaelic, isn't it?
Spelled in. No, it's Ironic, but it's. I'm talking about the Ironic version, and it's spelled in multiple different ways across multiple centuries in different texts. So I'm sure the pronunciation even changed, but in any case, it is the essence of sovereignty and divine favor and fortune, and it just descends upon the king, and then ultimately he loses it. Yima, or Jamshid, who is his epic version, in the epic Shahnameh and other places, Jamshid is another name of this Yima, and you can see that Jam or Jam Yam is a variation close to Yama. Jamshid. And
Jamshid is actually the possessor of basically the equivalent of the Holy Grail in the epics. I forgot what the Shahnameh, or I don't know how to pronounce it.
Well, yeah, it's a cup that he can look into and see the world and see prognostications, do divination and things like that. I think it has properties of curative properties as well. So that you could see that it's connected to like Mimir's well, maybe, or things along that line.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to look into that more myself.
So Diarmuid, one of the first things that happens to Diarmuid is that an ugly hag, what is called a loathly lady, comes to him. And if anyone has any superficial knowledge about the study of Celtic mythology, one of the most ubiquitous things in Celtic mythology study is the concept of the loathly lady, which is this hideous woman that appears to a future king, usually, or someone who is, a potential king, and they are the embodiment of sovereignty. You'll read this anywhere you read about Celtic mythology, is that the loathly lady is this hideous hag who embodies sovereignty, and she's often called a sovereignty goddess, which is this thing that's repeated as ad nauseum in Celtic studies, the sovereignty goddess. But she appears as a hideous, terrifying hag to the future king at first, and then when he embraces her, she'll turn into a beautiful woman. So this kind of, somehow there's some meaning behind this with the terrifying ugliness of sovereignty or of the land or the potential, the way sovereignty is a sort of doom that eventually will kill the king, or all these sorts of things. There might be other esoteric, I don't know if you guys have any knowledge of esoteric meaning behind the hag, the loathly lady who is the embodiment of sovereignty. Have you read anything about that? Anyone here?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff on hags specifically relating to Celtic folklore, but
loathly lady in particular. So there's like the hag. There's other hags like the Kayak, who's a different sort of thing. But there's this one type of hag that she's ugly, and then when the king or who's going to become king embraces her, she becomes beautiful, and then confers some kind of sovereignty or whatever.
Actually,
there could be esoteric understandings of that as well.
I mean, there is some stuff, but I don't know if I can actually talk about it because it was Vajrayana stuff. But
don't worry about it.
Talk about
you
it.
get the idea.
Yeah.
There's a lot you could dig into in that. Is my point. But anyways, so in the story of Diarmuid, a loathly lady, a hideous woman appears at his door and asks to come in, and he slowly lets her come in. She first says, "Can I come in your doorway?" Then, "Can I come into your into your entryway?" Then, "Can I come under your blanket with you?" And then finally he lets her, and he embraces her, and when he wakes up in the morning, she's a beautiful woman, and she is also magical, and she basically says, "I'll make this amazing house or sort of palace type place for you." And that is interesting as well because in the Yama myth, he has a special palace. It's like a house that he can move it wherever he wants. It can move wherever he wants. In the Diarmuid story, she says, "Where do you want your house to be?" And he says, "Up on that hill," and she makes it materialize on the hill. So it's this similar concept where Diarmuid says where he wants his house to be, and she makes it manifest. And then the one condition of her being with Diarmuid is that he will never mention how hideous she was when she first appeared. So he has this taboo associated with the woman, and he agrees to that, of course. But then, due to circumstances where Diarmuid goes back to the Fianna and Finn periodically, and every time he's gone, she gives away one of his greyhound's pups, and there's only three of them, and then basically Diarmuid can't. It's actually, the taboo is actually he can't say 3 times that she was hideous when they first met, and so after each one of the pups is given away to the Fianna who are asking for them, actually. So it's this funny thing, but that each time he comes back home and one of the pups is gone, he lashes out and says, he mentions how hideous she was when she first arrived. And so after the third one, she says, you broke your promise, and then she vanishes, and the house vanishes as well. And one small similarity is that he's despondent after that happens, and in the Yama version, when he loses the sovereignty, he's despondent, etc. So it's a similar theme. But the most important thing is that Yama loses his sovereignty in a triple form. So there is, let me see, if I can find where it says this, but basically it's unclear whether this means that he loses it in 3 parts. He loses one part, then another part of the sovereignty, then another part of the sovereignty, or if he loses it 3 times somehow, or it's kind of vague in the Iranic sources. But anyways, there's a triplicity to how he loses his sovereignty. In the Diarmuid story, he loses it in a triple event where he repeats that she's hideous one time, then another time, then a third time, and then his sovereignty is gone. So it's the exact same. There's a triple pattern to how he loses the sovereignty until it's completely.
It's not just vague Indo-European themes like a lot of other comparative mythology. It's pretty spot on. But also,
it's like exactly, yeah.
Another thing about it is it's like Diarmuid, I can't pronounce it, Don, basically, I'll just call him. He basically loses it through carelessness, like just out of a whim. Like he brings up her ugliness as referencing his own vow. So it's just like he doesn't even realize it at the time. It's just carelessness there. I don't know if that would relate in any way to the Iranian.
Yeah, it's a good point. So in the Iranic version, the reason he loses it changes in different versions, but it comes down to that he lies in a hubristic way. Hubris and lying are so lying is saying something wrong. Diarmuid breaks a promise. Are breaking a promise and lying pretty similar? I think so. So, and it's in a sort. He sort of becomes haughty, similar to hubris. Anyways, there's this.
Breaking a promise makes your promise a lie.
Exactly. So he says the wrong thing. He says it, and it's equivalent to a lie. And so, I think we can say that's pretty darn close across. Such a far distance. So the other versions are that Yama or Jamshid tries to become or claim himself the Lord of the universe, but proclaim himself when that's a lie at its root. And so there's variations on the theme, but that's hubris. That is the hubristic version. But it's also a lie that he created the world. That he makes this lie that he's so great. So, anyways, you can see this concept in the Diarmuid myth. I think that he's becoming he's forgetting himself and his place. He's forgetting that he only has the sovereignty because of the gods and because of the sovereignty goddess, and he's forgetting his sort of relationship to sovereignty, that it has been given to him as a gift, and he breaks his word against it.
Also, I'm noticing here, reading through the myths, Diarmuid also is associated with a lot of threes in his myth, and what do you know? Celts are known for their practice of a threefold death sacrifice. So that's another possible thing. It might just be Celtic though, because you don't really hear about that much in Iranic.
Yeah. Three will pop up a lot. So you could easily say, it's just three, but this specific place where this triplicity happens, it's really interesting. So, okay, let me just find my spot here. So he has a house high on the hill. He uttered a deceiving word, Yima did, and let's see. It's not clear whether it departed 3 times or whether it departed in 3 portions. In the Iranic version is what it says, but it did one or the other. So, in one of the Yima stories or traditions, the king's daughter tricks him into marrying her, and he is then exiled. And in another version, continuous with that, he is ultimately, he's exiled in very many of his variants. There are so many variants of the Yima story that they all have little different details in different texts across centuries and centuries. But basically, he is exiled, or he's running away from either Ahriman or Zahak, who is Ahriman. I have to emphasize this. But Ahriman is the demonization, is a demonized form of the Rudra type god. As we see in the creation myth, Ahriman is in the exact position of Odin. And you can go into that more, but Ahriman creates the peacock, which is a symbol of the son of Rudra.
But ultimately,
and also associated with Rudra himself. What?
But ultimately, it's the Mannerbund aspects, like the wild aspects of the Mannerbund, are transposed onto Ahriman because Zoroaster didn't like them.
So basically, Ahriman, as far as I can tell, he clearly has any Rudra type myth. It's the Zoroastrian reform was making anathema anything associated with these wild, excessive, ecstatic, violent type of deities. Well, not all violent deities, obviously, but this specific type of the Mannerbund practices that involved a lot of animal sacrifice was being pushed to the side, and you can see myths associated with both Vishnu and Rudra connected to Ahriman, and that's why you can't really find a clear Rudra among the gods of the Iranics, because he's been turned into Ahriman. And that's so in the Diarmuid story, the person who Diarmuid is running from is Finn McCool. Finn McCool is the Rudra type god of the Gaelic pantheon. So in the Iranic version, he's running from either Zahak or Ahriman, and Zahak is also very much like, he reminds me a lot of Balor, who is like Gaul, another one of the Fianna, and he's also connected to Vritra though. So Zahak, as far as I can tell, he looks like a combination of the more more ferocious side of the Rudras.
Well,
but
one
also
of the
maybe
11 Rudras
maybe
is Ahibudanya.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know if there's a
that's
conflation
cognate
with
with
Ahi.
Python, who,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's one of the serpents.
Ahi and Azi, yeah, exactly. So the serpents, he has, Zahak has serpents growing from his shoulders, and his name means serpent. And so he's either connected to, one of the ferocious Rudras, or he could have elements from the Vritra myth, or perhaps he doesn't. Perhaps there isn't a Vritra combination there. I'm not sure, but he's in a position in the myths very similar to Balor, I think. And Balor is, in my opinion, he's continuous with Gaul Macmorna, who is one of the Fianna, a more ferocious one of the Fianna or Rudra type deities. And it is in the Diarmuid myth, the people or the gods chasing after Diarmuid, who goes into exile, are Finn and then the sons of Morna, the sons of Gaul. So you have the sons of Gaul and Finn in one version, and then in the Iranic version you have Ahriman and Zahak. So those are pretty good parallels between who is sending Diarmuid into exile. But then you see that you see that Yima in one version, he's found in a tree. He's hidden himself in a tree. And so this is extremely important because that's what Diarmuid does. So Diarmuid is tricked or pressured actually into marrying Grainne, who is the daughter of the king, Conhovar, and she's intended to be married to Finn. Finn wants to marry her, but she doesn't want to because he's too old. And so she goes and tries to marry any of the other younger Fianna who she can find, and finally she pressures Diarmuid she creates a magical sort of taboo pressure on him where he has to marry her. And so he goes along with it, and he sort of knows that it's going to lead to his end, but he has to go along with it. And then so he's on the run from these specific Finn and the Sons of Morna and some others. Basically, just Finn is the driving force, trying to track down Diarmuid. And actually, the sons of Finn himself, Oshin and Oscar, they are kind of trying to pacify Finn all along the way, as well as Angus. Angus is sort of helping Diarmuid. He's not a son of Finn, but he's helping Diarmuid, and then the sons of Finn are trying to pacify Finn and tell him and to help Diarmuid ultimately. It's kind of interesting, but and then Diarmuid ultimately goes to a tree and hides in a tree with Grainne, and that's where he's found by the sons of Morna, who then tell Finn, and Finn goes and finds him there ultimately at the end. And that's what happens with Yima. As I mentioned, there's a tradition where a princess tricks him into marrying her that causes him to be exiled. And then in another tradition where he's found is in a tree. And in other traditions, he's found like somewhere else, like by the ocean. But there is a tradition where he's found in a tree, which is very strange, and I think should be noted. Because then the other thing I want to mention is the enclosure. So the enclosure of Yima is very significant to his myth, as I mentioned as well. And he's the one who creates this enclosure to wait out the winter. And it's just a significant part of his myth. So the narrative of Diarmuid and Grainne is Grainne forces Diarmuid to marry her, and then they have to run off and be exiled, running away from Finn. And where they go, one of the first places they go is to a special forest, and in the forest they hide out for a while, and Diarmuid creates an enclosure. And it's called an enclosure in the English translations, but so here he hides out in a defensive enclosure in a wood grove, and then later on he goes to the tree where he's found. So it's two separate events. But in the Gaelic text, it says, I can't pronounce this name, but it's Doira on Beoth. It's Doireanbhaoth, an imaginary wood allegedly situated in Connacht. Here Diarmuid made a clearing with 7 doors, and in this clearing the lovers lay hidden. So it's an enclosure within a grove of trees.
All right. So
in the midst of Clan Rickard, Diarmuid cut down the grove around him and made it to 7 doors of wattles, and he settled a bed of soft rushes, and on the tops of the birch under Grana, in the very midst of that wood. And then it says, who else cut the woods thus and made a close warm enclosure thereof, with 7 tight slender narrow doors to it? So he called it an enclosure in that sentence, and made a close warm enclosure thereof. And then it says, after that Diarmuid drew near to one of the 7, this is Finn. After that, Finn drew near to one of the 7 wattled doors that were there in the enclosure, and asked who was at it. So more than one time this is referred to as an enclosure. It has specific measurements to it, which is odd. It has these 7 wattled doors with narrow passages.
Yeah, there's a lot of esoteric implications in this one.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know the specific meanings of those, but it reminds you of how enclosures in the Yima story and also in the Noah's Ark have these specific measurements to them. And it's
really specific, and like it's specific to a fault, to where like
it's way more
make sense.
Yeah, of course. I'm just saying that this is just one event in Diarmuid's story that you would probably brush past if you read it without context. They're just hiding in a defensive enclosure. But the fact that it has these measurements to it that are very odd, and it's called an enclosure more than once. They hang out there for a while, and then Finn and his men finally come, and there's this confrontation where he's like, I won't come out here unless Finn is there. He only wants to go out the exit where Finn is so that he can confront Finn face to face, basically. And it's interesting. I don't know the specific meaning of it, but he's in an enclosure for a while. And I think this is a remnant. I think this has to be a remnant of the same enclosure concept, even though it's not. With Gaelic myth, this is one thing I wanted to say that's important to reading Gaelic myth. You'll have a story like this, and in other mythologies, they'll explain every single thing. They'll say, this guy is death, and this guy is the first man. And when this happens, it introduces death for the first time. And this enclosure is made to wait out the cosmic winter. But in Irish myth, it's like presented just like a story. And it's all code. It's like, oh, don't worry, this is just a romance. These things are just happening, and it won't explain any of the events. But you have to, obviously the people listening would have known the meanings behind this. But it's all there if you understand the context, because you have these other things pointing to Diarmuid being this Yima figure, and then of course, one of the main events in his story is he goes to an enclosure and he waits there with his wife for a while. There's no context around it saying this is like a special enclosure where they're going to wait out the cosmic winter. What they're waiting out is Finn's rage, basically, which could be analogous to the cosmic winter. So you have to read this metaphor into it. Otherwise, you have to understand that this could be just a metaphor. He's in this enclosure. Even though outwardly it doesn't have all these obvious signs, he doesn't bring in a bunch of animals with him or humans that are going to survive. But what he does is he waits it out. And the big significant thing is he sends his wife out with Angus. So there is this moment of preserving, of the life preserving, continuing, protected, that leaves the enclosure, and then ultimately he escapes and continues his exile. But I do think Finn being there threatening can be compared to the cosmic winter. Finn is this cosmic god who, even in even in the Sumerian flood myth, it is Enlil who is inflicting the flood upon the humans, trying to destroy the world, and Enlil is the Sumerian parallel of Rudra or Finn. And so you could see how the cosmic winter, sort of destructive force of Finn that's been unleashed, could be, even though it's not said in this Gaelic text, that's just how Gaelic texts operate. They leave it all under the surface. You would have no idea that this is being allegorized, or that this could potentially be the same myth of the enclosure.
And
so what were you going to say?
For all we know, these texts were basically written by Druids who had converted into monks by that point. So it's really odd how coded these myths are. But I also have a couple things to say. Have you gone through just saying like that Dawn and Diarmuid are probably the same?
Yeah, I mentioned that Dawn and Diarmuid are probably the same, and it's just based on some surmise about Diarmuid is often called Dawn Diarmuid or Diarmuid Dawn, different variations, and Diarmuid just means the unenvious one, which could be, you could then see that the unenvious one, maybe that's an epithet of the god of death, and I think, once you start with a clue like that, then you investigate, okay, does Diarmuid's myth match the other Yama types? And that's where you kind of go from there and say, like, wow, it's one thing after another. It really confirms. By the end of the Diarmuid story, you realize it's this just compendium of myths about the god of dead and also about death in general. So,
well, I mean, Dawn is supposed to be the progenitor of the Celtic people, apparently, from what we have from the Romans. So,
well, I think you might be jumping a conclusion there, but some people, just because it says this Potter is the
yeah, exactly.
Answer, like, but he isn't necessarily the Dispotter that the Romans are referring to, I would say. I don't think he's necessarily, because Dawn isn't the ancestor of or ever Dawn in the story. He's not really the ancestor. He just dies. Now it's possible. It is certainly possible that was just the esoteric meaning, and that some other tradition showed descent from Dawn himself, and that he was the Dispotter. But I haven't seen any evidence that he's the one that they're talking about. But it would line up with Yama and Manu being ancestor figures. I think I still think it's possible that it's like Bila is the Dispotter, the grandfather of Dawn. But anyways,
well, I mean, Romans weren't exactly spot on with a lot of their comparisons as well. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was the fact that there's these 7 doors, and it's almost we can assume, for sake of my argument right now, that it is Mimir's hold. That means, so think about this. Where do humans live in the earlier parts of the cycle in Norse mythology? They live in Midgard, right? And Lif and Lifrasir are the start of the new cycle. So basically, Mimir's Holt there is acting as Midgard. So maybe it's crap. I kind of lost my train of thought, but you see where I'm going with this.
So the 7. What are the 7?
Okay. I'm going back to that. The 7 gates would be probably. I'm just speculating, and it's complete speculation, is 7 luminaries of classical tradition. As we know, Celts were well versed in astrology from what little sources we have, but yeah.
That's interesting. That could be a possibility. There's like some of the men of Finn are at each one of the exits when they come to get him. And he keeps saying, "I'm not going to go out this one. I'm not going to go out that one." And then finally he goes out the one where Finn himself is. I also wonder if that can also align with let's see, there aren't 7 narrow exits from the body, are there? You know what I mean? Like the cosmic body idea. Is that anything? You got,
I don't know enough about that one.
You got 2 nostrils, 1 mouth, 2 ears, a couple other exits. I don't know if but there's always possibility that the cosmic body, you could be within sort of a cosmic
there are 7 exits
that you're within, and it's funny how it says in the Irish story, like, narrow exits. Why are they so narrow?
I mean, your ear canal and your nose.
Ear canal,
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty narrow.
Yeah. I mean, so does it map onto that, and in some way you're being protected within the cosmic man?
At first, counting your exits, you would count the mouth, right? But what if it's actually the belly button here? That's pretty narrow.
That's true. I mean, they're all said to be narrow, so I don't really know, but
this is nonsense.
You have the belly button there,
but yeah,
I know we shouldn't. Okay, we'll pull back from this rabbit hole, but it's interesting to think about, and it would be nice to see if we could figure out what those esoteric meanings are. But they're definitely there.
Like you
so
said,
let me try to find.
With context, you can understand so much more about it.
Yeah.
I think that's what's missing from a lot of comparative mythology at the end of the day is too much opinion and not enough, context. But of course, this is also opinion too. It's just more, I would say, a little more educated.
Yeah. So I'll continue with the Diarmuid stuff here. I just wanted to point out that Diarmuid resists Grainne at first, just like in the Yama and Yami myth. So this is another thing: is there is an incest they're brother and sister in the Indo-Iranic versions, Yama and Yami, and in the Irish version they're not at all. It's just the king's daughter. But there's a variant in the Yima version where it's just the king's daughter. So there's this confusion even in the Indo-Iranic version: is are they brother and sister, or are they just Yima and the king's daughter? And so those things are being kind of confused, or there were two separate stories that were merging or something like that. What were we going to say?
Also, in the Adam and Eve story, I don't know whether it says this directly in the Bible, or even I think it's a Torah. It would be the Torah, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it says it in either of those. It might, but it's Eve who actually, I think it does. It's Eve who tempts Adam into eating the forbidden fruit.
Yeah, definitely. And so in the Yama story, it's definitely Yima, the sister, who tempts. She's trying to tempt. There's a whole hymn, Rig Veda 10.10, where she is trying to tempt her brother Yama to a romantic relationship with her, or whatever, to have children with her. And he's resisting. So he resists at first, and that's how the hymn ends, with him resisting. But then we know from other things that he does have children, and it seems like it's with her. And in the Iranic version, it is him and his sister who have offspring, and this introduces death in both versions, or mortality in both versions. And it is interesting. It says in the Rig Veda hymn, the sister is mentioning, already in the womb we were made to be husband and wife. So it reminds one of Adam and Eve being the rib of Adam. They're kind of like siblings who have been made as one in the womb and then broken apart. So there's this incestuous thing potentially in the Adam and Eve story, but it's not made explicit. Just like it's not made explicit in the Irish version. But
well, you got to think, God and like Christianity and Judaism, or like Jehovah, in that he has like the power to procreate. So I mean, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So, but I do want to say that there's these variants. One that's an incest variant, and then one it's just the king's daughter in the Iranic version that tricks him. And in the Irish one, it is just the king's daughter. So the incest one hasn't been included in that, but there's this line between the king's daughter version. And then in the Iranic one, you can see that those two are being conflated because, or that they're just the same thing from the beginning, because in one version he runs off, he gets exiled with the king's daughter, Yima does, and in another version he gets exiled with his sister. It's Jam and Jami, like Yama and Yami. So let's see. So Yama resists at first. He says it's not proper for them. In the hymn in the Rig Veda, Yama resists his sister, even though later they end up going off and being exiled together and having offspring. But in the Irish one, Diarmuid also resists first, then she pressures him into it, and they run off together and are exiled. So those things all align, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, I'm going to find my next point here. So Diarmuid steals finally they get to their sort of final grove of trees, a new forest that they go to. After making sort of a truce, okay, what happens is they go to hide at another forest, and Finn is still after them. And in this forest, there is a bush, or it is a quicken tree that has berries, and this quicken tree has been dropped there by the Tuatha Dé Danann, planted there from some magical berries of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the gods, and a guardian has been placed there. I can't pronounce his name, but it's something like Sharvan or Shirvan, Searban, and Lochlanach. And he's this ogre that is placed to guard this tree. And Diarmuid gets a hunting permit from the guardian of the tree of the forest, and he's allowed to hunt there and eat whatever he wants from anything. And the one condition is that he can't eat from the berries from this tree. And it is the berries of the quicken tree of Dubros or Duros, I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting that the one who gives permission to go into the sacred space and the one who says that they're forbidden is like kind of like a demon here.
Well, he's like a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, I think.
Oh,
he's
okay.
been placed
Right.
there. It says yeah.
You described him a little.
Okay. Yeah. Well, he is an ogre. He's a youth of the Tuatha Dé Danann that is a thick-boned, large-nosed, crooked-tusked, red-eyed, swart-bodied giant of the children of wicked Cam, the son of Noah. So that ties him into to demonic lineages. But he's also somehow he's also a Tuatha Dé Danann. So he's both things. He's a terrifying ogre like Tuatha Dé Danann.
Okay.
But it's anyway. But one eye only in the fair middle of his black forehead, and a thick collar of iron. Anyways,
like a slave as well, but okay.
Let me get through this stuff here. So they make a compact to not take from the tree, and they agree to that, and they get a license to hunt and eat from the forest. And let's see, the berries have the property of, they give you the exhilaration of wine and the satisfying of old mead. So they're connected to wine and mead, kind of soma powers. And were it at the age of a century that he tasted them, he would return again to be 30 years old. So it gives potentially eternal life if you keep eating them. It gives extended life. And what I found in the Iranic traditions is that the food doesn't necessarily give eternal life, but some traditions say it gives extremely long length of life. And here's what it says. Okay. In the Middle Persian translation of Yasna 9.1, people are said to have become immortal by eating the meat Jamshid or Yima offered them. And in a story in the Persian Rivayats, some Middle Persian texts specify that immortality did not imply forever, only a very long time. And in the Menoi Igrad has 300 years, and the Pahlavi Videvdad has 150 years. So you can see that these berries of Diarmuid they extend life continually, which could be similar to this very long time / immortality of the Iranic version. It's not a big difference. It's not just one being immortality and one being long life. It's the fact that in the Iranic version it is also said that it's not necessarily instant immortality.
Well, this is also
it can just be extended years. Yeah.
So. Well, this is also an obvious parallel. As Eden's I just said it. Eden. Idun. I think it's more how it's
Ivun or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce
it. Without calling her Eden. But her apples obviously bestow use to the gods, and it's another parallel would be the Amrita in Indian or Vedic rather stuff. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll bring in is that so we know that Diarmuid hides in a tree, and that he in this forest it says he drinks pure water there and eats meat and stuff like that in the forest, and then he eventually eats the berries. In the Yama hymn, 10.135, it's the first verse says. So this is one of the only Yama hymns in the Rig Veda. There aren't that many. The very first verse says, "In the tree clothed with goodly leaves, where Yama drinketh with the gods." So Yama, in the very first verse of this, one of his only hymns, he is depicted as in the tree, clothed with goodly leaves. He's living in a tree here, and he's drinking with the gods. Now that becomes Yama's domain, or his symbol of his domain.
That's even weirdly close to Christian iconography on Adam, clothed in leaves. I mean, of course,
clothed in leaves, exactly. No, exactly. So clothed in leaves, hiding in a tree. Okay, so let me just read the passage where they eat the berries, because you can be the judge of how this compares. Wait, I'm going to take a pause for just a second, okay? I'll be right back.
All right, now we can talk amongst ourselves. Or myself.
I'm actually getting kind of interested around the whole serpent Rudra thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact that...
And also Gugalana, because I've been so confused about Gugalana. It's only implied or theorized that he's the bull of heaven that Gilgamesh kills. I mean, it's very, very plausible, but because I'm trying to... Because essentially the Sumerians were the first to associate, at least recorded, associate the planets with deities, and everything really comes from them in that regard. And the planet Mars is most of the time called Nergal, which is Apollo Rudra.
Yeah.
But even before, earlier than that, Mars is called Gugalana. So I've been trying to figure that out. And he's the first husband of Ereshkigal who dies. And when Inanna descends, one of the times out of the world she's going to visit his funeral. But it seems a little fringe.
I don't know if Sir Dolan has. All right, I'll stop it there.
I didn't hear what you guys were talking. Sorry, I have to leave in 15 minutes to do some things. But okay, let me try to read through this part about the berries, if that's all right with you guys.
Go ahead.
So basically, what's going to happen is that his wife Grania makes him steal the berries. But here are the quotes. When they were come into the forest, Diarmuid made a hunting booth in the very midst of the forest, and slew a wild deer that night, so that he and Grania ate and drank their fill of flesh and pure water. Diarmuid rose early and went to the guardian, whose name I can't pronounce, and made bonds of covenant and compact with him, and got from him license to hunt and to chase, provided that he would never meddle with his berries, the berries of the quicken tree, of the Tuatha. And then... let's see the next part. The children of Morna come after Finn there, and those are the sons of Gaul himself. So they could be similar to connected to parallel to Zahakt in the Iranic version, perhaps. And they're trying to get the berry. They have a mission from Finn to either get the head of Diarmuid or to get the berries of this tree for Finn, actually. They're trying to get them for Finn. And they'll get a reward if they do. Basically, they'll get reinstated in peace with Finn if they're able to do this. Let's see. So Diarmuid says to them, when Finn outlawed me and became my enemy, I got of him leave to hunt, provided that I should never meddle with the berries. So for some reason he says that Finn is connected to that. Oh no, he's talking about the guardian, but he's saying when Finn outlawed me, he got leave to hunt from the guardian of the forest. And then Grania says, I vow that even if the children of Morna go not to seek those berries, I will never lie in thy bed unless I get a portion of them. Although that is no fit thing for a woman to do, being pregnant. And I indeed am now heavy and pregnant, and I shall not live if I taste not those berries. And then it says, there, O Grania, said Diarmuid, are the berries thou didst ask for, and do thou thyself pluck of them whatever pleases thee. So I jumped ahead in that passage, but Diarmuid sends the sons of Morna to pick the berries after Diarmuid kills the guardian. He makes the sons of Morna pick the berries and give them to Grania. But Grania refuses them because they haven't been picked by Diarmuid. She says, I swear that I will not taste a single berry of them, but the berry that thy hand shall pluck, O Diarmuid. Thereupon Diarmuid rose and stood and plucked the berries for Grania and for the children of Morna, so that they ate their fill of them. When they were filled, Diarmuid spoke and said, O children of Morna, take as many as ye can of these berries, and tell Finn that it was ye yourselves that slew the Sharvan Lachlanach. So he tries to he tries to lie about what has happened as well, which I think is in the Adam and Eve story. I think they try to lie and say they haven't eaten from the tree. Isn't that what happens?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember that, but yeah. they definitely cope about it.
I thought they kind of deny at first, and then anyway, I'm not sure.
Well, they
either.
do not deny, but they kind of try to cover themselves up, and they kind of feel.
They try to cover themselves up.
About their
okay,
options.
that must be what I'm thinking of. So what happens in this one is basically because Grania demands that Diarmuid pick the berries, and then they're given to Finn. Finn is able to smell the berries and sense or smell Diarmuid's flesh has touched them, and this allows him to track Diarmuid directly to this forest and the tree, and to know that he's there. So because Grania makes Diarmuid be the one to pick the berries, this directly leads to Diarmuid being caught in the end by Finn, because the berries get taken back to Finn. Finn is trying to find Diarmuid, and he smells Finn's flesh on the berries and goes and confronts him, and that's where he's hiding in the tree at that point. So basically, you can see that like with Eve, it is the wife. She's pregnant here also, which is interesting, and she makes Diarmuid be the one to pick them, and this leads to him getting caught by Finn. Let's see. And anyways, you can see it's quite different in a lot of outward details to the Adam and Eve story. So it doesn't really look like just a direct copy and paste in a lot of ways, but that kind of makes it more interesting, because it leaves you asking yourself, how did this story that is so similar to the Adam and Eve find itself in this longer story that is full of Indo-European Yama mythos, and where are they drawing this from? It's also a coded story where most people wouldn't know, or a druid would know, obviously, but compilers or people just cramming things together. This is the way I look at it: is when these stories are so coded, and then you find something like this, it doesn't look like it's just borrowed into it from another source, right? Because how would they know to put it in the exact? How would they know to put it in the exact right place in this coded tale?
It's not just like stolen Christian mythology either.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean,
how could they steal it and put it in this form into this coded story? So what does that say about where this came from, what the original myth looked like, the fact that it's forbidden fruit instead of, meat or whatever in the Iranic version, and how did this get transmitted? What were you going to say? Sorry to cut you off.
Well, it's interesting to think about how, fervently, Celtic peoples adopted Catholicism in light of this, and the obsessive view of the Trinity in that light as well. Because obviously, like we know, maybe the audience isn't going to know, but there are a lot of, they may know, but there are a lot of like Celtic monks that were literally druids that got converted. And a lot of these stories come from these same people. So it's weird. It's weird to think that maybe they saw what was coming and, decided, oh, this is the same stuff over and over again. We'll just get by with this for a little bit. And also I want to bring up, Ethan, the Amrita and the golden apples, or not golden. I don't even know if they're even golden in the mythology, but the apples of immortality are also associated with sovereignty to some degree, right? And we can see Ethan as the sovereignty-giving goddess, I guess, which could line up with the loathly lady, but I don't know, because that's a little bit earlier in the myth.
Yeah, it could be, this is the sort of thing where I would say there could be like echoes in later, like I don't think it's the same event, you know what I mean, with Ethan's apples, but then you can have these reflections of the same exact
quality of the king, but not kingship itself. So
yeah. I wasn't saying like that specifically, related there, but it's a sovereignty.
You can draw a direct line, and you can draw a line for sure between the properties of the fruit and all that. It's just, it leaves me with the question of, was the original Indo-European version of this myth, did it have forbidden fruit or not? Because why do you have forbidden fruit? You think of, basically when you compare the Indo-Iranic and the Mesopotamian versions, you think, or scholars think, anyone who looks at it thinks, the Indo-Iranic version doesn't have forbidden fruit. The Mesopotamian version has, Adam and Eve, the Semitic and Mesopotamian has the Adam and Eve forbidden fruit, and then Gilgamesh, there's a plant that gives immortality and things like that. That could be that some people have tried to connect with the same type of theme. So you have plants in that part of the world, but not in the Indo-Iranic. There's either no plant connected to like Yama in the Vedic. You just have incest, or he's drinking pure water and things like that. And then in the Iranic version, you have some traditions where he has meat that gives immortality, right? So you don't have so people have kind of thought that the forbidden fruit in this type of myth was not Indo-European, but how does it get into the Irish version if it wasn't in the original Indo-European version? It doesn't, like, to me, it seems less likely that it's borrowed into this story later as like copying Christian myths. It's just, it's berries for one thing. It's not even what is usually thought of. There's all these differences. There's a guardian.
And then we have like the Christian genealogy haphazardly placed, but before any of the gods are even really in the myth as well. Because, like, as you said, descendants of like Shem or Cham and Noah, and those are the offspring of Adam and Eve. So it's kind of weird to put the same myth, the same Christian myth over again, but with Celtic, deities.
Yeah, why would and then to sort of and still to kind of like change it and conceal it? Why would you wouldn't if you're like Christian trying to do this, why would you change so much about it? You would just insert it as Adam and Eve or something. If you're really trying to change the myths to be Adam and Eve, why wouldn't you just make it exactly much more like it? And how would you know enough to put it in this coded right in the right spot? So anyways, I gotta go, but I would like to talk about more implications of this tomorrow. I'll just come on tomorrow, and if anyone's around, we can try to talk more if there's anything more to be said. But
and I'll record
it leaves me with this. It leaves me with this question about: is it possible there was an Indo-European myth involving that actually had the forbidden fruit element, or a Indo-European Sumerian myth that had the forbidden fruit or something? How did it survive? How did the forbidden fruit survive into the Gaelic version of this myth? And it's such a mind-boggling question. How, and
well,
it can't just be random. I don't know.
Before you go, so I know you just said it, but the Sumerian version does not have the fruit, right?
No, it has. There's a plant.
Well,
that's
the
not
Akkadian one
it's a plant.
So
okay.
Still Mesopotamian, there is a fruit of eternal youth, though. It's about youth, not immortality, necessarily, at least.
Well, this one in the...
And we can continue talking about it in the recording. He can listen to the end of it later, and then we can continue tomorrow.
Yeah,
because I'm going to stay in and say some things.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the Sumerian and that sort of stuff, and how that connects tomorrow.
A bunch of things to say about the Sumerian, how Gilgamesh makes sense within the list of 7 kings, which, by the way, parallels the Roman 7 kings. So I mean, there's material to talk about tomorrow. Perfect. So,
all right. Well, I'll talk to you guys then. And this is really. Thanks for letting me. Just kind of rant a bit, and I'll talk to you guys when we get a chance. All right. See ya.